Hi, thank you for joining another episode of Kosovo Dispatch. I'm your host, Visar Jambazi, and today we're going to talk about the future of the EU-facilitated dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia. The Kosovo-Serbia dialogue has faced significant challenges in normalizing relations between the two countries. However, Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine injected a sense of urgency and provided renewed impetus to address the dialogue. This led to a new diplomatic offensive that culminated in the finalization of the Second Brussels Agreement and its implementation annex in March 2023. Despite these efforts, the new agreement fell short of achieving its intended outcome as the Serbian government violated its provisions on multiple occasions and questioned the legality of the agreement. However, the European Union and the United States did not hold Serbia accountable for its actions. This lack of response by the West undermined the implementation and effectiveness of the New Deal, and consequently, there were no significant breakthroughs in the negotiations. As the EU approaches elections in June this year, the current EU envoy for the dialogue, Miroslav Lajcak, is expected to be replaced. With the EU embarking on its new 5-year mandate, numerous questions and uncertainties persist regarding the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue. To discuss this, we're joined today by Viola von Cramon, a member of the EU Parliament and the Standing Rapporteur for the European Parliament on Kosovo. Thank you for joining the Kosovo Dispatch, Viola.
Thanks a lot for having me, Visar.
I'd like to begin with a broader question to kickstart the conversation. How would you evaluate the European Union's efforts to normalize relations between Kosovo and Serbia?
Well, when I picked up my rapporteurship in the end of 19, or actually the beginning of 2022, there was a big expectation, there was a big hope. There was actually, I would say, quite a window of opportunity for making things happening. Then for different reasons, on one or the other side, things didn't go the way we expected or some other people expected. But nevertheless, I think what you could see and what you could observe was there was always quite a close coordination, cooperation, linkage between the US side and the EU side. That was not the case when Trump was in power and Richard Grenell was the special envoy for the Balkans. So actually, with the Biden administration, with the special envoys from the EU, from the US, from even Great Britain and other countries working all on the same side and try to help to make it happen. I had really hoped that we could see more progress. I thought that it is in the interest of Kosovo and Serbia to see a successful outcome of this dialogue. Because if we are stuck, if we have the stalemate, if there is no progress, the whole, I would say, enlargement procedure is kept back. And so there was quite a pressure, I think, from the EU side. I had hoped there would be more pressure from the domestic audience. There was quite a pressure from a lot of international friends of Kosovo and Serbia, but obviously that was not enough.
Yeah, on the topic of the special envoys, I'd like to ask you, how do you assess the role of Josep Borrell and Miroslav Lajcak in the dialogue? What have been the achievements and pitfalls, according to you?
Josep Borrell, at least at the beginning, made quite an effort to get some output, some success in the region. But to be honest, he was not, or he did not come with the biggest ambition or with the genuine interest in the region. I mean, he is one working in Latin America, having the Spanish speaking advantage. He was never too much familiar with the situation in the Western Balkan, with Eastern Europe and so on. So he carved out that portfolio and explicitly gave it to Miroslav Lajcak. So in the end, when there were the high-level meeting, the high-level talks, which were crucial for Miroslav Lajcak, I think he had hoped that there would be more energy from the High Representative as such, that he would put more pressure, that he would have shown more interest, more ambition, more personal engagement. And I think even Borrell understood that for the EU as such, it is important to put a lot of personal activity and engagement into this procedure. I think in the end, after one or two less successful meetings, so to say, between Prime Minister Kurti and Aleksandar Vucic, he more or less gave up. And I think that was a problem. So we had a lot of, or many intentions to bring them together, to have this base agreement, to have an annex with a schedule and so on. But there was not enough dedication, personal engagement, especially from Borrell and maybe also from his team, from his cabinet, to understand how much more they had to actually pressure to get an outcome. And I think that Lajcak himself tried, did a lot, were quite active on the ground, but there was a bias from the very beginning. Since he comes from a non-recognized state, I think that it was rather easy, especially in Pristina, to label him as biased, to label him as pro-Serbian or less favoring Pristina or Kosovo side. And that made his life not easier. Apart maybe from one mistake, which was obvious, that he let Aleksandar Vucic go without the real signature in Ohrid. I think that was a severe mistake. But apart from this, I think he tried a lot, and he brought everything into the game. He tried to cooperate with Paris and with Berlin a lot. He worked a lot with the Brits. He coordinated with Washington. So he really used all the means he had on hands.
Yeah, but despite the challenges, Borrell and Lajcak managed to achieve a second normalization deal. Despite the lack of a signature, what else? What other problems do you see right now? Why did this agreement and its implementation annex fall short of expectations?
Well, first of all, I think that none of the sides saw that they can gain anything domestically. Both sides had the impression that it is much easier for them to resist than to implement or to sign any of these agreements or any of the topics, points from the agreement. So Kurti, from his perspective, said it's not a problem to sign, while in the background he used the I will not implement. Vucic, on the other hand, said, I don't care about signing. But that, of course, questioned a lot of his ambition to do anything. But I've heard that he, in many of the talks, said that he would be actually ready to do some of the steps. So there was a lot of cherry picking. There was not a lot of political will to compromise and to sell this compromise in the end to the voters, to the citizens, to their own people. And obviously, the attractiveness of what the EU had promised or what the EU had offered to the sides were not enough to make this compromise happening. And that is extremely disappointing to see. So the attractiveness of EU integration, of coming closer to the internal market, making sure that all the obstacles which are now in the way for both countries to move forward, for Kosovo to become a candidate country, for Serbia to move forward in the accession process, don't want to shy away. I think we are much too soft on Serbia. I think there were many options when we should have been not much more outspoken, but also have measures against Serbia, not just after Banska, but also after the non-signature and after other steps. And so when you see that only one side is being targeted with measures because of the, let's say, non-compromising behavior, it is super easy then for the other side to excuse themselves, to say, well, if it's only us, why should we follow your advice if the other side doesn't deliver on anything? And that is, in a nutshell, I think the biggest problem. There was no political will, but the alleged, I would say, biasness didn't make it easier and made it super easy then also for the Kosovo side to say, why should we come up with a compromise? Why should we implement if on the other side you do not even start to pressure? No.
Now I'd like to talk about the role of Albin Kurti and Aleksandar Vucic in the dialogue. How would you evaluate the approach of Kurti and Vucic?
The problem is with the frustration, especially on the Kosovo side, for not getting anything out of the dialogue. That is at least the narrative which was portrayed by the government. And this new narrative of reciprocity, we ended up in a situation where not just Aleksandar Vucic took the Serbs in Kosovo as hostages, but also Albin Kurti. And for me, that was rather sad to see this. Actually, none of the sides really cared about the group, which were, I would say, the reason why you have this dialogue. Yeah? You have the dialogue to find a structure that for the group, which is a non.
By the group, you're referring to Kosovo Serb, just to be specific.
Yes, in this case, I mean the non-majority groups, to make sure that with the independence of Kosovo, that the foundation of the independence is being upheld, and then you see that the government actually uses its opportunity to derive from this foundation of independence by a lot of single measures. And that is sometimes, I don't know how to describe this, but each and every single measure, like switching from dinar to euro, and lobbying against the passport authorities, these temporary authorities, and so on. Every single issue is okay, but if you add it up, it looks very much that there's only one group suffering under this, and one group, of course, negatively affected by all these measures, and that is definitely the groups, the non-majority groups. Of course, it can be portrayed, and that flies super easy in Kosovo, to label them as the mouthpiece of Vucic, as if they are all acting in the interest of the president of Serbia. But that is a bit too simple. Here, at least, I had the impression that there is a new narrative now, and the new narrative is making the life as difficult as possible for the groups, so that they might leave the country. Now you can say, well, yeah, it is your perspective, but in the end, we have problem with demographics in the Balkans anyway. So it's not just the north of Kosovo where people are leaving, it's overall. It's in south of Serbia because, of course, Serbia does the same and even worse things to the Albanian minorities in the south of Serbia. So there's also this effect of reciprocity. And if you speak to the Albanian minority, they are not even included in the dialogue process. So it's even more difficult to raise their voice because nobody cares. Yeah. So, of course, you do understand where this is rooted, this frustration, and why things are going this way as they are going. But when you look in the overall picture and you think, what kind of interest does Kosovo have? And what kind of interest should the prime minister of this country have? I would say start just implementing. But instead, you got the impression that both president of Serbia and the prime minister of Kosovo, that they mirror each other. Yeah, that there's a mutual interest to make the life difficult, and that is the priority more than a politic where each and every citizen benefit from. I do understand why, of course, somebody like Albin Kurti, who suffered in a prison Milosevic time, has an interest to get a, how to say, level of not level, but a way of justice. But at one point, I think you need a mature attitude to rule a country, to govern a country. And if you always look back, I don't think that is enough. Your legacy should also be built on what you achieve for your country. We speak now a lot about the European Union, how it was founded. We are in the midst of the electoral campaign. We speak a lot about this very deep-rooted hostile situation between Germany and France after the war. And I'm super grateful that I belong to the generation 25 years after the war, that France offered Germany to overcome this old, bloody war-related, yes, the past. So for us, for Germany, there was a big chance. Of course, you cannot compare the situation because Serbia has never done that. Serbia has never committed the war crimes. Serbia has never committed its responsibility. Serbia was never kept accountable for this. That's, I don't want to be misunderstood. But what is the outcome here? I mean, we can always refer to the past. We can always say there is no justice. And then in the end, we are stuck. And this is the situation as I see it now. And I do hope that we can overcome this situation as soon as possible.
Yeah. Based on your experience, what conditions are necessary for a successful dialogue? What factors should the European Union consider as new institutions are established following the EU elections in June 2024?
We have this already agreement. We do see that at least Serbia has not cared at all. I mean, the application of Kosovo was absolutely legitimate. But Serbia invested more time in lobbying against the application than in implementing any of this, of its obligations. And I think this needs to be sanctioned. I mean, sanctioned, or at least that needs to have negative consequences. Serbia needs to feel the tangible consequences. If we agree that each and every side should do its part for implementing the obligation, and Serbia does the opposite of this, why should that go without any consequences? And of course, the same is true then for Kosovo. We see that there is not too much appetite for creating an ASM. And of course, the frustration on the Kosovo Serb side is rather big that in the end, they are left without anything. There's no political will. And also here, I would have hoped we could have at least started the debate about consulting. There is a draft. The draft is done by civil society, by legal expert. It's not the Brussels draft. I mean, we have asked many times to ask the people on the ground to be involved, to come up with a proposal. So far, I think officials from both sides were not ready to put a proposal forward. And this needs to be taken into account. There, I think we should organize more discussions about that. What are the consequences, so that there is not a disinformation campaign going on, but that is according to the facts, which will result from this ASM. But on the other hand, I would really wish, and I think it is absolutely necessary, to go against this Serbian non-recognizing campaign, which are actually, if you take this Ohrid agreement seriously, it's absolutely forbidden. And since none of the parties feel any consequences, of course, this is like a free lunch, and they will go ahead with this. So we need to be tougher. Sanctions need to be tangible, or negative measures, however you would call that. And then, of course, in the case now of the north of Kosovo, we see there were the referendum. I think most of the parts of the Kosovo Special Police has been withdrawn, and all the other criteria, I think most of them have been implemented. Then I would say the measures can be lifted.
Viola von Cramon, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thanks a lot for having me, Divisa.